Is trauma actually real? Most men think they are running towards something, when in reality, they're actually running away from something. If we're going to ask the question, how do I unlock a greater degree of high performance? We first have to ask the question, okay, what is stopping you from tapping into that yourself?
How does this, at a base level, serve me better to lead people, to steward?
We have to risk in order to grow. There's no way around that. The question then just becomes, how much of this can I do and still feel safe? Now, a lot of this is happening unconsciously. Our nervous system registers it as a threat, and so the natural response is to self-sabotage. Now, oh no, I was just pulling my shorts down. As much as I want people to see my massive quads.
Yep. We're rolling, Bobby?
Complete, utter joke.
Rolling?
It's good, yeah.
Good to go?
Scoot over.
All right. My first question, I want to start this off with something that you and I have been pondering back and forth for a while, and something that I've been toying with for a while. Do you think it's necessary, specifically for men, to need to go through pain in order to make a change in their life?
Great question. And here's what I'll say. The short answer is yes. There are two great catalysts for transformation. Alcoholics Anonymous posits this, but it precedes and predates them quite extensively. But the two great catalysts are great love and great suffering. They're life's two greatest teachers. And if you know great love, well, then you know great suffering. So it pretty much just boils down to great suffering.
Give me an example of both.
Well, great love would be a great example. A classic example is having children.
Sure.
You constantly hear it's a love unlike any that you've ever felt or experienced in your life. Experiencing bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh. There's just nothing that can replicate that. But of course, and like we talked about over dinner last night, now all of a sudden you have this mirror who is reflecting back to you all of your unhealed trauma and pain because you're projecting it, however unconsciously or unintentionally, onto the child through your parenting, through raising them, and then that's just being mirrored back to you. Right? So of course you're being confronted by all of the things that you haven't dealt with internally.
Sure.
Great suffering could be any number of things. It most commonly takes the form or the shape of death, disease, divorce, or disaster. Something that you cannot handle, something that's bigger than you.
Sure.
That your current mental resources are just not a match for.
Yeah. Now you mentioned the word trauma, right? And trauma gets thrown around very almost loosely and lightly nowadays, right? Like everyone's got their own trauma and stuff. Now, I believe that trauma exists, and we go deep into it on this podcast. But as someone that's pretty much, I wouldn't pigeonhole you to like a trauma specialist, but you're very well studied on the concepts of trauma. Help us understand at the base level what trauma actually is, and then I want to start translating it towards like how that shows up in high performance entrepreneurship. Because I believe, and we'll unpack this, entrepreneurship is a trauma response.
It certainly can be. So, a lot to unpack there, because you are right in terms of like, is trauma actually real? If you're familiar with Gabor Mate, who is one of the foremost experts on addiction, understanding that addiction is just in an attempt to solve for pain or for trauma. You're right, I'm not a clinician, but I'm trauma trained. And so in light of that, to answer the question, like, what is trauma? Clinically, trauma is anything that is too much, too soon, too fast, or too little, too slow, not enough. That interrupts one's perception of self and causes them to make up self-limiting stories about themselves, other people in the world, and therefore how they relate to themselves, how they fit in with other people, and how they relate to the world in general. So it's anything that creates a limitation or pain as it comes to our perception of the world.
Have you studied epigenetics at all?
a lot.
Okay. So share with us at the base level. We won't go too deep into it, but the foundation, because this was a game changer for me when I found out that like sometimes the trauma doesn't even come from my personal experience. It comes from my ancestors, whatever that looks like.
Yeah. There's a lot to that. And this is a great time to also bring in the Enneagram, which you're familiar with, which is I hate to call it a personality assessment, but for the sake of those listening, if you're unfamiliar with it. But the traditionalists posited for a long time that you could be born into your type and that your early childhood experiences served as confirmation bias to your dominant type. And then there was the camp that thought your early childhood experiences created your type.
Okay.
So there were kind of two camps for a long, long period of time.
So you're the just so that I'm hearing you correctly, you got the people that believe that you were just born into it.
Yep.
And then like your experience itself can furthermost bring out where you're most dominant.
Yep.
And then there's the other camp where it's like you weren't born into it at all, and just your worldview and your experiences everywhere you grew up, your environment. Okay.
Yep. And then epigenetics came along, and we started, analyzing people's DNA and their genetic structure. And what we found was, for example, the classic case of alcoholism and how alcoholism can be passed down genetically. There is a little nuance there because technically that's not true. Alcoholism is not genetic. What is genetic is one's predisposition to addiction. That's what's genetic.
Unpack that. 3rd grade level.
Trauma is passed down through one's genes. The greater degree of trauma that you have, whether through your own direct experience or that which has been passed on to you by your parents, the more prone you are to addiction.
Got it.
Right? Because one's addiction is a direct mirror reflection, a perfect match for the amount of trauma that lives inside of your body. So if you take an alcoholic, for example, their need to use alcohol as a coping mechanism, the same is true for a drug addict or any addict, but we'll just use alcohol as an example. Their need or their dependency for alcohol as a coping mechanism is a mirror reflection of the trauma that lives inside of their body.
So the trauma is stored in the body.
Yep.
Where that much we know. We've talked about this on previous episodes.
The
so
issues are in
watching.
the tissues.
Yeah. Makes a lot of sense. Now, everything that you're alluding to, though, like trauma is too much, too fast, and then too little, too slow. It's like, it feels like almost everything is creating a traumatic response.
It certainly can.
How do we conceptualize that, appreciate it, understand and take it for what it is, while also not letting it stunt us?
Great question. So if we assume that what we believe with conviction becomes the life that we live, much of trauma, and this is also from Gabor, he says that trauma is much more about what happens inside of us as a result of what happens to us, as opposed to what actually happened. The stories and the beliefs that we make up about ourselves, other people in the world, that then dictate how we feel, our attitude, our energy, which then, of course, directly influences our actions and our decisions.
Just to pause you for a second, would like a very small example of that be like at the surface level, it's not actually about the event that happened. Let's say you had an embarrassing moment. It's about the laughs and the feelings that you had after that made you feel embarrassed.
How you internalized it.
Yep, got it.
Yep, absolutely. And how that impacted, most oftentimes negatively impacted your sense of self.
Well, think about how important that is from a parenting lens, where it's like, the way you respond to how your kid has an event is the trauma itself. It's not the actual event.
100% it is. Yep, absolutely. Okay. And we see this in parenting all the time, where because the child is just mirroring the nervous system of the parent. In fact, a child needs another nervous system to mirror until they're around the age of like 7 or 8 years old. So they're just playing off of you in terms of how should I internalize this experience, right? Take just a very basic example of like falling down, where the child is clearly okay. They haven't actually hurt themselves, but the parent overly reacts because they're frightened, as opposed to taking a pause, assessing the situation and saying, you're okay. Right? The child is looking to the parent as far as how they ought to respond. And that becomes how they perceive the incident.
Sure.
And that can create a loop. Right? A loop that we can easily get stuck in for years. It's called a trauma loop. where, for example, if we ever experience, say, an unexpected event of financial scarcity, we become incredibly overwhelmed and anxious, as opposed to, say, for example, empowered. We tap into creative thinking, problem solving, etc.
Yep.
Same incident, two very different responses based on our ability to handle the event.
Sure. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Fast forward now to how this plays up in your work.
Yep.
The way that I consider you is like you own an identity reconstruction company. Yeah, essentially, you're an identity reconstructionist.
That's a good way to put
per
it.
se.
Yeah.
Share at a high level, kind of like what your work is, who you serve, and then we'll go deeper, because the messaging of this podcast is around high-performing young individuals. So I really want to make sure we take all of these concepts and apply it to those that are getting into entrepreneurship, that are dealing with the stuff, because this is stuff that I needed to hear when I was first starting, because it would have definitely gotten me along the way further.
Sure. Well, let me start by saying, I'll open a loop that we'll come back to later, but I won't spend any time there, is the way up is the way down. You're supposed to screw it up.
Yep. And
the paradox in that is that if you try really hard not to screw it up, the irony of that is that you're going to end up screwing it up. And that's supposed to happen. That's part of your journey. But at a very fundamental level, what I do is an identity deconstructionist, where I support high-performing men in optimizing for their belief system and their identity to increase their threshold to experience greater success. And I do that through subconscious optimization, spiritual mentorship, which is a very massive key component to the work that I do. Because at a certain point in time, we were all meant to come into a relationship with a higher purpose and a higher power that is bigger than us, where it's not about our success, personal achievement, accomplishment, or the propping up of oneself.
Sure.
Those two things really seem to be the only thing that provide us with this higher force for living. So that's kind of what I do at a very fundamental level. Where we start is, of course, because if we're going to ask the question, how do I unlock a greater degree of high performance? We first have to ask the question, okay, what is stopping you from tapping into that yourself? Because we all have a threshold in terms of what we feel safe and worthy of receiving. And that ceiling is set in place by our current level of emotional intelligence, conscious awareness, and self-growth and healing. And so in order to expand or raise that ceiling, right, just this barometer for success, if you will, to let a greater degree of financial abundance, opportunity, relationship, love into our lives, we have to increase that ceiling. If we don't, or we have to increase our somatic capacity to be able to hold it.
Sure.
You probably see this with your clients all the time as it pertains to their relationship with money, right? Clients all of a sudden come into a high degree of wealth that they're not prepared to steward, manage, nurture, grow. And so what do? They start to spend frivolously. That's a nervous system response to results that in the moment surpass their current level of belief and identity.
Yep. So good. So like where I've seen that play out, which is why I really wish I understood this earlier, was that if you don't expand that emotional capacity that you're alluding to, the quicker that you gain financial success in the world of entrepreneurship, it won't last. Correct. Like it's relatively easy to get to that quote unquote mountaintop there. Yeah. It's much harder to stay there. We're trying to create lastingness and what's the word for it? Staying power is what I like to. So like help us deconstruct where most entrepreneurs go into this with like the identity crisis of it.
Yep.
And how we can go about deconstructing that earlier so that when abundance does come, let's keep it in the lens of financially, from business success, this can be there. It can have staying power.
Sure. So you're 100% correct. Walls that go up fast tend to come down fast, because we haven't developed what is in the world of trauma and nervous system work. We haven't developed the somatic nervous system capacity to hold those results. So in this case, right, we're talking about money. We're not in a position yet in terms of our emotional intelligence, conscious awareness, personal growth and healing to nurture and be responsible for that amount of success, money, and opportunity. And so our nervous system registers it as a threat. Now, a lot of this is happening unconsciously, right? Our nervous system registers Our nervous system registers it as a threat, and so the natural response is to self-sabotage. Now, in the world of self-growth and self-development, traditionally speaking, most people don't know what to do with that, and so we just make it wrong, which is just the easiest thing to do. But self-sabotage is just self-protection. It's our nervous system's way of returning back to our base state, or what we consider to be normal, safe, and familiar. And so, but to answer your question, like, how do we develop a greater degree of like staying power? Well, we invest in the three things that ultimately go into and factor into our capacity to maintain a high degree of staying power, which again is emotional intelligence, conscious awareness, self-development, and healing. The more we invest in those things, the more somatic capacity and therefore internal resilience you're going to develop, the more staying power you're going to have. There's a direct correlation.
Zoom out for a second.
Yep.
Just because at this point, I'm my 22-year-old self is watching this and like, I'm about too much science, a lot going on here. How does this make me more money? How does this help serve me in entrepreneurship? Let's go there for a second.
Yep.
How does this at a base level serve me better to lead people, to steward financial success better? And then I'll take us on a different tangent after that.
So two things, just to kind of land the importance of this work is, you know, if you're listening to this and you're like, okay, great, a lot of science. How do I apply this practically in a way that's going to serve me or for me in my business, in my career, in my ambitious pursuits? Number one, you cannot outperform your current belief system and your current sense of self. Both of those things reside in your unconscious mind. So in order to optimize for those things, you have to engage in a modality, whether it's coaching, therapy, counseling, or otherwise. Right? Books and podcasts are only going to take you so far, right? Because you're still relying on your current level of awareness in order to digest those things. You have to engage in a modality that is going to unlock a greater degree of awareness in a way that's going to reveal the internal blocks that prevent you from being more successful. So we have to engage in those things if we're going to expand our current level of self and optimize for our belief system so that we can become more successful. The second thing is you can't screw it up. And that is going to completely fly in the face of what much of the self-development world is. And this is where we can take the conversation into a more spiritual avenue, is we learn to get it right by doing it wrong. But we're kind of operating in fear of getting it wrong. But fear attracts like energy. And so we cannot be afraid of screwing it up because, again, we learn to get it right by doing it wrong. Success and failure, they go together. And so when we push away one of those things, we push away both of them inevitably.
That point is worth the price of admission there. So I want people to take a second to ruminate on that, because it's not the only way to actually screw it up is actually bringing fear into the ether of this whole thing, right? So it's bringing fear into the fear of screwing it up. It's not the actual screwing it up itself.
Correct.
Okay.
Because when we fear screwing it up, what are we unlikely to do? We're unlikely to take that risk, make that investment, make that hire, right? Whatever you need to do in order to get your business to the next level, whatever that is for you, whatever that looks like for you, you're going to move away from taking those action steps. And that's where you're going to hit a plateau, you're going to stall. And so when it comes to, working with my clients in taking on a greater degree of risk, because we have to risk in order to grow, there's no way around that, right? We have to stretch the muscle if we hope to grow it. The question then just becomes, how much of this can I do and still feel safe? And that's where we talk about risk capacity, and because your threshold for risk is different than my threshold for risk, right? We have different circumstances. I have 2 kids. You're a single guy, so your risk tolerance is likely a lot higher because you only have yourself, which is nothing wrong or bad about it. It's just to point out that we all have a different threshold for risk. And so when it comes to leaning into it, we want to do it in a way that is both stretchy and doable, not straining or debilitating. Because when we move into straining or debilitating, that's when we risk injury, or in this case, taking on too much risk.
Yeah, that's good, man. Now, why is it that we can hear this, agree with it, but men still need to put their hand on the stove to be able to learn the experience?
So this is very indicative of the 2 halves of life, which I believe was first positioned by Carl Jung, the famous psychotherapist, or 2 mountains. And the first mountain is all about, and we kind of alluded to it previously, it's all about success, accomplishment, and achievement, building my tower, if you will. And then the second half of life is all about coming down from that tower, understanding that what you thought was available to you at the top is actually available to you at the bottom. Now, men can hear this, but it's going to fly right over the head of most, because there's actually a lot of research to suggest that men simply don't have ears for this in a way that causes them to integrate and apply what we're talking about, this awareness, into their life until they're around the age of 35.
Interesting. Yep. Why is that?
Well, for one, your prefrontal cortex is still developing until you're around the age of 25, 26 years old, right? So you're kind of still coming into manhood, or maturity, if you will, from a biological perspective. In fact, there's an incredible book called The Biology of Transcendence, which talks about our innate brain surges that we experience from the time we're born up until the time our brain is done developing. And with each one of those stages, we need different things, and we also prioritize different things. So, but that just seems to be the classic male journey, that we need something to conquer, something to accomplish or achieve in order to develop a healthy ego, right? A healthy sense of self.
Do you think that's how God created this?
Yes, in short.
Let's go into long, not in short.
Yeah.
I want to get deep into the biblical side of it. Like, where does that show up in the faith side of it? So how do we integrate this work? Because what I've come to find is that, like, all this work is simply just like the science of following what God had intended to create for us.
Essentially,
Help us unpack that a little bit. And before I go, I think you were finishing a thought too. I didn't want to cut you off if you had a thought to finish.
I think that's it.
Okay.
Effectively, our personality is continuing to unfold until we're around the age of 35. At 35, what makes up the whole of your personality becomes essentially solidified, and it becomes your character. Character, the Latin root of it, means set in stone. And so that just becomes who we are.
Sure.
But prior to that, our personality is very fluid. After that, it takes something kind of dramatic in order for us to make a change.
Got it.
Going back to the death, disease, divorce or disaster type piece. But from a biblical perspective, the easiest place to look at this is the story of the prodigal son. The story of the prodigal son was a metaphor for the journey that we all have to go on, the spiritual journey that we all have to go on in order to come back to our true self.
What's the story of the prodigal son?
So if you're familiar, it's a story of two brothers. One of the sons wants to, he craves independence, and he goes to his father and he asks for his inheritance early so that he can go off an adventure, which in those days was to essentially say to your father, I wish you were dead. So there's so many aspects to this story that we can find really beautiful lessons in. But the father obliges. He gives him his portion of inheritance, and then the son goes off, and he parties, and he drinks, and he squanders the money. And he finds himself in like a pig's pen, down to his last penny. He's squandered his entire inheritance, and he's literally eating pig's food, pig slop. And that's the thing, right, going back to great suffering, that's the thing that wakes him up to the reality of what he had been doing, which is essentially thinking that his happiness, his joy, his fulfillment was out there. And so what does he do? He goes back home. He takes this journey back home, and his father sees him at a distance, and he essentially comes up to him and he says, make me one of your servants. I'm not worthy of being called your son. And his father essentially says nonsense, and he throws a party, and he kills the fattened calf to have a feast, puts a golden ring on his finger and a robe on his back. My son was dead and now he is alive. But it's really just a big metaphor for the journey of death and rebirth that we all need to go on in order to come back to our true self, which is simply to say who we are in God. And so when you look at the work of self-development, because we're obviously combining neuroscience, psychology, obviously spirituality, into what goes into creating and ensuring true transformation. Because most of the work out there today is just bogus self-help on your own terms. But if we look at the arc of the prodigal son, it follows perfectly the steps that we have to go through in order to become, more of who we already are. And that is construction, deconstruction, reconstruction. Put another way, overcompensation, decompensation, proper compensation, or recompensation, right? So what does the son do in order to have a good time? He essentially says, I wish you were dead, Dad. Like, I would like my inheritance now. And I'm going to choose going off and partying over having a relationship with you. Overcompensation. Decompensation. Squanders the money, right? Makes all the mistakes, right? A lot of mistakes that people are trying to avoid that we're meant to make, that we're meant to go through. And then that's what wakes him up. And then he properly compensates. And he goes back home to what? To realize that everything that he was in search of and looking for was actually already right there, hidden in plain sight.
Dude, for anyone that's watching this, we all have that story inside of us. I urge you to conceptualize what that even looks like. If it's not even as dramatic as, finding yourself lost, losing it all, coming back. Yep. The wrestle with God is designed to be a wrestle, it feels like.
I mean, I know that very well. My name means one who wrestles with God.
Interesting.
Jacob.
Yeah.
But, there's a lot of podcasts where, and not necessarily this show, I think this show absolutely does a brilliant job of taking a different spin and looking at it from a different perspective. But so much of the advice that we're given nowadays is like, how can I not screw it up? How can I fast track my success and avoid, the mistakes? And that's not supposed to happen.
There's no staying power if you do try and fast track.
Correct.
Yep.
You are meant to fall. And I would suggest that you have to fall. You have to go through what the prodigal son went through, right? That's one of 3 parables in the Bible that talks about losing and finding. There's also the parable of the lost coin and the lost sheep. No accident. All of them illustrating the same thing from a slightly different perspective about the journey that we all have to go on. And so when, we talk about, speaking to my 22-year-old self, very simplistically, I would just say, play the game. Play the game as best as you can, and do not worry about screwing it up, because you will, and you're supposed to. And that will be the thing that you need to eventually realize one day that what you really want, everything that you want, is hidden in plain sight in this present moment. It's not out there.
The process of becoming your ideal self is simply through subtraction, shedding out the layers that
unbecoming.
Yep. Process of becoming is unbecoming.
Yes. True transformation, no matter what anyone tells you, it fundamentally requires, it's predicated upon dying to something.
Unpack that.
But the ego doesn't it's just another way of saying what you just mentioned, which is that the process of becoming more starts with unbecoming.
Yeah.
Right? Transformation is predicated on dying to something. It's about removal. It's about subtraction. It's about purification. Right? We talk about the refiner's fire in the Bible, where it essentially uses the process of refining metal as a metaphor for what we have to go through in terms of the process of sanctification, becoming holy, which is just to say becoming, again, more of who we already are, who we are in Christ, coming back to our true and authentic self.
I just did a Bible study on that, actually, so I want to unpack this from your lens as well, because I've been doing internal family systems work.
Powerful work.
It's really powerful work where I'm starting to really bring less shame to the warring parts of myself, because we have multiple personalities going on at the same exact time.
Yep.
And I mean, this goes back to Paul talking about it in Romans, and
Yep.
he's talking about, why do I do what I don't want to do, and I don't do what I want to do?
Yep.
That's just how we're genetically designed to be. And the word sanctification came up when I was starting to study this, and a light bulb moment came off for me where it was like, Jesus is a part of that warring part. He's a part of me and inside here. And how cool is it that we get the grace to go fuck it up the entire time?
Correct.
And all he does is like give you those little knocks.
Yep.
He'll knock, but he's not going to force you
Yep.
to do anything. But then the second I started to conceptualize that in the therapy work, where I'm bringing Jesus as a part of me into the warring parts of myself, there's an overwhelming sense of peace.
Yeah.
Unpack that from your lens, just because obviously
Sure.
you've studied this a lot
Yep.
more than I have.
From a trauma perspective, shame is arguably the biggest thing that gets in the way of us healing and being able to access love and to receive love. And so as long as we are holding on to guilt and shame, maybe because of something we did, something that happened to us, we're fundamentally blocking ourselves emotionally and energetically from experiencing love or community or thriving relationship, right? Two things cannot take the same space at the same time, right? It's the law of thermodynamics. And so as long as shame is in place, it's taking the place of something much more beautiful and expansive like love. From a biblical perspective, it fundamentally prevents us from the felt experience of grace. So the more we learn about grace, or the more we hear grace preached to us, because we're still holding on to shame, the cruel irony is that the more evidence we acquire that we don't actually have it. And that's what happens when you get stuck in the law and order stage of religion, where it's much more about the rules, right? Salvation is much more about sin avoided.
Yep. Which is a freaking lie.
Jesus condemns morality.
Yep.
But what keeps people there? What keeps people there is that they're still stuck in the law and order stage of psychological development, the egoic stage of psychological development. What supports us in breaking out of that phase or that stage of psychological development? It's self-development and healing. Mm-hmm. Because as a part of that, whether you're working with a coach or a therapist or somebody else, a fundamental part of your work with that person ought to involve or include embracing a non-dual mindset and breaking out of dualistic thinking. Right, wrong, good, bad, black and white, where we cannot hold paradox. Right? The paradox that is kind of innate in what we've been talking about this entire time is the fact that you can screw it up and you can't. And both of those are true simultaneously. Yeah. How are both of those things true? Of course, your actions have consequences. Right? So if you go out on a bender on a Friday night and you drink a lot, you're probably going to have a hangover the next day. That's obvious. So yes, your actions still have a consequence. So you can screw it up in terms of that perspective, but you can't screw it up at the same time, because what ultimately led to you being like, you know what, I'm not going to do that again. I am going to embrace a life of greater sobriety or maybe even spirituality, because over here I'm running from something in all likelihood by virtue of leveraging alcohol as a coping mechanism. But over here I'm running towards something by exercising self-growth and spirituality and a relationship with God. Yep. And that's where most men find themselves in. Most men think they are running towards something, when in reality, they're actually running away from something.
How do we not use that framework to give ourselves a constant permission slip to go off the rails? Right? Like, how do you manage that dichotomy of like, if you know that you can't screw it up in the long term, I give myself a permission slip to kind of just consciously go do these things all the time, which are objectively probably not healthy for me.
Sure. Well, the unintended side effect of pursuing a life of growth, of healing, of spirituality, is that you increasingly become more moral. Right? It's a side effect of that. And so, assuming you're in the process of that journey of pursuing self-growth and self-betterment, you are going to, and this is probably the best way that I can put it, is you're going to be able to include those things, but transcend them. Insofar that, for example, I can have a drink on a Friday night, not because I'm running from anything necessarily, not because I'm coping or trying to take the edge off, but because I really like the taste of a good old-fashioned.
Certainly do.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, and this is where you shift from the mechanism, the coping mechanism or the addiction being in control of you, to now you're in control of it. Now, for some people, they have the awareness, they have the discernment to say, that's not possible for me, right? And they choose to be completely sober. And I'm not discouraging that whatsoever. If anything, I want to encourage that, because it shows a high level of discernment to say that I'm incapable, and humility, to say I'm incapable of having a healthy relationship with whatever, say alcohol. But then for some people, they can begin to re-include that thing into their life, but they can transcend the addictive nature or power over it, because the substance in and of itself is completely neutral. It's how we choose to use it where it becomes self-deprecating and damaging, right? The Bible talks about this. Everything is permissible, but not everything is beneficial.
Yeah.
So what it's essentially implying is that, the drink, that's not the problem. But do you have the wisdom and the discernment to self-diagnose based on who you are and your journey, where you're at in terms of your own self-growth and healing, what you've gone through, family history, all of these things, to say, you know what, I can have one drink and that's fine. Or to say, no, if I have one drink, I'm going to have 10. So it's different for different people.
Can you go deeper into this concept with porn? That's probably been my biggest battle since I was younger. Unpack that.
So I did an entire podcast episode on porn that we should probably link in the show notes to this. Separate podcast from a Christian guy. His name's Satya, does brilliant work, but he fundamentally helps men overcome porn addiction. He and I did a podcast episode 2 years ago because he's a Christian guy, and the church has screwed this whole they have completely screwed things up as it comes to supporting men or even approaching the conversation around porn.
It's like the silent addiction no one wants to talk about because they feel shame around it.
Totally. But if we boil it down and we just completely look at it objectively, if we take the morality out of it, which is what I'm constantly encouraging my clients to do, because as long as you're stuck in morality, you are actually further fueling the need for a coping mechanism.
Yep.
You are. And I could go into that later, but that's a whole other conversation. But nevertheless, if we simply look at what is addiction, regardless of what it's to, but in this case, we're talking about porn, it is fundamentally in an attempt to solve for pain. Why is that important? Because the wrong question is why the addiction. The right question is why the pain. We tend to hyperfixate and focus on the addiction because we don't know what else to do with it. So, right, we do the easiest thing possible, especially in the church. We make it wrong, as opposed to trying to better understand why it's there in the first place.
Because the addiction is just the numbing agent to actually get to the root cause.
It is just the side effect. Yep. Correct. Yep. And so as long as we are focused on the side effect, as you alluded to, we're not getting to the root cause issue that resides beneath the side effect. And so, this is where the church, especially the fundamental conservative Christian church, has largely gotten it wrong, because it puts men inside of a game that they cannot win, because it tees them up to live a life of performance where we naturally suppress the less than ideal qualities and characteristics about ourselves, right? We develop a very robust shadow, more so than most people, because again, our relationship to God and to salvation has become what? Sin avoided, or correct thought. And then we accentuate the ideal qualities and characteristics about ourselves. That puts us inside of a pressure cooker. And every pressure cooker needs what? It needs a release valve. So if you are in an environment, whether it's a church, whether it's a Bible study, or whether it's even a culture that highly or overly emphasizes performance, accomplishment, and achievement, you're gonna need a coping mechanism. So you have to break out of this law and order stage of psychological development. But if we go back to the fundamental understanding that porn is just in an attempt to solve for pain, then, and this is gonna completely sound heretical to some people, we can actually remove the stigma from it, the shame from it, and we can learn to be grateful for it.
Interesting.
Because any attempt to solve for pain, I might suggest, is a good thing. You're just doing it in the wrong way. Right? The question is, can you hold the tension of the paradox that I just communicated? Right? Because if you're stuck in a dualistic mindset, you're either going to do one of two things. You're going to do what you just did, which goes, interesting, and says, I'm going to chew on that. Or it's going to downright reject it.
Yep.
Right? So that's what's going to happen if you're stuck in dualistic thinking. But if you are doing the work of self-growth and healing and increasing your conscious awareness, you're going to be able to shift more readily into non-dual thinking, which resulted in what you just did. Interesting. Let me chew on that. Let me consider what he's saying and take it on and run it through my system and hold the tension of both of those things. That yes, porn is a debilitating addiction. It erodes our brain chemistry. It fundamentally screws up our dopamine receptors. It fries them, and it numbs our ability for depth of connection, vulnerability, and intimacy in relationship. All of those things are true.
Can confirm.
Yep. Like we don't need any more studies on the debilitating nature and the side effects of pornography. Very well documented. And it's not but, it's both and, because that can also be true. And what can also be true simultaneously is that any attempt to solve for pain is necessary and good until you know what to do with your pain.
Use me as the guinea pig. Let's go deeper. So I'm willing to get mega vulnerable here. So let's drop in for a second. Let's say I've been battling porn addiction for a very long time, and I am very close on the other side of it. It's been a very solid journey from definitely where it started. But let's just start there with, like, if you're talking to me as I was a client of yours, let's go into it. I want to be able to, somebody that's going through this right now, because I could certainly tell you my 22-year-old self needed to stop jerking off like 3-4 times a day. Yeah. Let's go deeper into this.
Well, let me ask you, what do you like about it?
Nothing. It's a immediate quick hit that immediately gets associated with, like, why the hell did I do this? Because I didn't need it at all. And it's really about the thoughts and the lust leading up to it.
Sure. That
feels good, and then nothing.
So if you were to take judgment and what you think you should say around it, what if I were to ask the question again around what do you like about it? Not what you should say.
Sure.
Now, no judgment around it. You're not analyzing it.
Yeah. Sex feels good, and
great.
Watching women are hot.
Right. Awesome. All of those things are biologically wired into you. What is right about it?
What is right about it? Ask me the question in a different way.
Going back to that, every addiction, including your past addiction to porn, is in an attempt to solve for pain. With that understanding, what is right about it?
If I look at it through that lens, it's given me an indicator that something needs to be addressed.
Provided you with a compass.
Yeah.
Pointed you in the direction of what needs to be healed.
But I'm lost. What needs to be healed? I don't get it.
But do you see what's happening right now?
Yeah.
You're experiencing a reorientation towards your sense of self upon being given permission that you're not wrong for this struggle.
And while just so that we'll take a pause just so I can just address people that are watching, like while he's asking me this, I'm already battling my previous self and thinking of everything, where it's like I'm already at war thinking of like, here's how I want to answer. There's defense mechanisms popping up.
Yep.
It's a battle to address your ego going through this. So sorry, drop back in.
And it's a battle because
there's a lot of pain that I don't understand, but it gets addressed through quick hits that I could, if I just wanted to, I could just keep doing, and it's not innately really harming anything that in the conscious immediately, you know?
So what stuck out to me about what you said was I've had a lot of pain that I haven't known what to do with. So as a, say, 12-year-old, 13-year-old boy, you have the internet. You have no idea what to do with this pain. And you have pornography readily accessible and available to you at your fingertips. And it makes you feel good because sex feels good and women look hot. What else were you supposed to do?
Nothing.
Right. Because you didn't have the mental acuity at 12 or 13 or whenever this started.
Yep.
To know what to do with the pain. So you turned to the easiest thing possible or the thing most readily available. Very understandable.
Mm-hmm.
How do you feel after hearing me say that?
It takes the shame out of it for sure.
Bingo.
Yeah.
Bingo.
It makes it much easier to start going deeper because it's no longer, you don't feel a hatred towards it.
Right. You're not making it wrong or bad. You're not judging it, analyzing it. We're simply talking about it in a neutral way that gives you a greater degree of permission to move through the shame, which by very nature is going to create greater capacity for you to experience more. What do you really want?
Peace.
There you go. Pretty cool how that works.
So how important is it for me to actually identify the pain itself, right? Do I have to be able to heal through it? Because like part of like some of the work that I've been going through is like, you don't even have to create attribution to why this thing exists. You just got to kind of like let it be there and get rid of alleviate the shame that gets associated with it. Mm-hmm. Help me understand, like, do we need to go deeper to address the actual pain?
Yep.
And how do we do that?
So this is where I fundamentally disagree with internal family systems work. Mm-hmm. I have the privilege of staying with you while I'm here in Tampa, and I couldn't help myself but look over your bookshelf, and of course, right there in the middle is The Alchemist.
Such a good book.
Such a great book. If we talk about the fundamental work of alchemy, there is a lot to be said about internal family systems in terms of moving through shame and processing the emotions that inherently come with shame, a little bit of which you just did. Super powerful work to create more real estate to access peace, experience joy, because you're no longer suppressing as much. Simultaneously, I believe that the work of alchemy is fundamentally becoming grateful for the pain that has happened to you. And I think the only way to do that is to go into it and to rewrite the stories that we have created around it. So for example, the very first podcast episode you and I ever did was talking about how I was sexually abused growing up, and all of the trauma that created around my sense of self, my confidence, my self-esteem, all of these things, and how I carried that with me well into my 20s until here I am, super successful, but I feel empty and hollow inside. Now, through an incredible amount of work, I fundamentally see that as being the source of my gift, which is empathy, to be able to sit here with you and hold this safe space for you to be able to arrive at a place within yourself that says, I've had this struggle. How do I fully work through it? I've made progress, but there's still some lingering side effects that I would like help with. That's the work of alchemy. That's the work of healing. And that's how I'm able to completely experience a reorientation to the event in a way that is empowering, in a way that takes pain and turns it into progress, purpose, and power.
It's a lot to unpack, dude. At a high level, tactically, what does that look like? What does the work look like?
Well, let's fundamentally start by becoming aware. We talked about construction earlier. The process of construction is becoming aware of the internal blocks, barriers, pain that holds me back from experiencing a greater degree of abundance, even if that is an internal felt sense of peace. Okay, now that I've become aware, right? Take a very practical example. I'm aware that there are rats in the attic, but me becoming aware of them does not make them go away.
Sure.
It's one of the ego's biggest tricks, in my opinion, and it's one of the things that is not talking about enough in the world of self-growth. Because people will hire a coach for 3 months, they'll become hyper aware, but they'll still struggle with the same things because
they use awareness as like the goal. Like that's the goal, is awareness.
Right.
But, so sorry, please.
No,
continue.
you're 100% correct.
It's clicking.
They come into a greater degree of conscious awareness and they feel like they've had a breakthrough. They haven't had a breakthrough. They've had a breakthrough at the level of awareness, but that has yet to be integrated into their behavior, right? And in a way that causes their actions and their decisions to fundamentally change, and therefore their results, their life. So the ego is going to convince you that, like, you did it, right? You did it. You have had a breakthrough because you've come into awareness of, I had a conversation with a new client the other day where we talked about their propensity to be agreeable and their tendency towards people pleasing was simply an adaptation to being loved and accepted by mom. That's all it was. And they were continuing to carry that around with them well into adulthood, and now it was holding them back from being as successful as they were capable of being in business. Because, of course, they weren't telling clients what they needed to hear. Clients aren't respecting them. They're canceling early. They're not renewing. And so their business was hyper dependent upon new clients, which are the hardest to get, rather than on clients continuing to renew and client retention. So becoming aware is simply the first step. Construction. Deconstruction is where we break through, overcome, and we rewrite those stories that we continue to maintain about ourselves, other people, and the world that hold us back. That process takes a long time.
How long? On average? We're talking months, years?
It depends on how old you are.
Sure.
Depends on the level of trauma that you've experienced. It depends, of course, on your willingness to engage with and go into the work. It depends on a lot of things.
Sure.
The three primary things that go into making a change are intensity, frequency, and duration. So let's just take the gym as an example. Right? How intense is the workout when you're actually doing it? How long, right? The duration, are you doing that workout for? Are you doing it for a half an hour? Are you doing it for an hour? And then how frequently are you doing those workouts? How often are you going to the gym every week, every month, etc.?
Yeah.
That's what determines your progress.
Got it.
Those three primary things. This work is exactly the same. How often are you, for example, meeting with your coach, your counselor, or your therapist? For how long? An hour, 90 minutes? Did you go for 3 months and then stop? Or did you go for a year and then 2 years? Right? All of this compounds. It's just like your muscles. If you don't use it, you lose it.
Yep.
Right? Our brains are actually wired to a victim mindset. It's called external locus of control, blaming other people or other things outside of us for our results. Internal locus of control, that takes time to cultivate, and it takes ongoing practice, right? You got to keep going back to the gym, right? Just like with our physical fitness, our mental fitness is the exact same.
Because the awareness is, relatively speaking, easy to create, but
Correct.
Creating the subconscious, like getting it down to the subconscious root where you can start using these practices without thinking about it,
yes,
is, in my opinion, the next level.
That's unconscious competence.
Yeah.
You know, so you start with unconscious incompetence. So you are unaware of the unconscious forces that continue to hold you back, and how you continue to be influenced by them. Then we move into conscious incompetence, where like, okay, I become aware of those blocks, those barriers, those limiting beliefs, but they're still holding me back. I'm aware that there are rats in the attic. Right? Then conscious incompetence, right? So I'm now practicing breaking through these beliefs. I'm aware of the skill that I need to have, but I'm not yet proficient at it, right? You're going to the driving range, right? If you're a golfer, you're practicing, but you're not really good at it yet. And then conscious competence, where now you're good at it, right? Your fluency is high, but it's not yet like second nature. And then to what you said, we shift into unconscious competence, where now it just becomes a part of our character. It becomes automatic.
Yeah. Would you say that that's kind of like the path to mastery?
Correct.
Essentially? Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
And there is no shortcutting mastery.
No.
Right? When we talk about self-mastery, it takes a long time. But if I'm working with someone in their 20s compared to someone in their 50s, someone who's in their 20s, they're going to be much less, in all likelihood, their nervous system is going to be much more flexible, much more fluid, because their brain is still developing, at least from a psychological perspective, from a spiritual, emotional perspective. They're still very open in terms of how they see the world. You had a buddy over here yesterday who was in his early 20s, and he's very inquisitive, asking tons of awesome questions because he has a very fluid, flexible nervous system. Somebody who's in their 50s is going to have a much more fixed nervous system. So we are going to have to do a lot of work around simply changing the way that they think before we can achieve adherence.
Yep.
Before we can achieve, okay, this is what we're doing based on these new set of beliefs. And that can take 6 months.
Mm-hmm.
Before we begin to unravel and undo all of these beliefs that have been ingrained for decades.
Yeah.
So it simply depends on the person. The right thing for the wrong person, it's still the wrong thing. And that's why, as well-intended as things like, 75 hard are, for example, I'm very quick to analyze my client's nervous system capacity for intensity. Because if their nervous system isn't prepared to take on that level of intensity, that in and of itself can be traumatizing to their system.
You could crash even harder.
100%. Yeah. For other people, it can be awesome. And it can be incredibly, it can achieve a high level of growth and progress and results. So I'm certainly not downplaying it. But this is where the nuance of transformation and achieving sustainable behavior change staying power, as you mentioned, it becomes highly important to analyze those various factors.
So good, man. So good. Last topic I really want to go deeper into is the concept of love. And you wrote a book called Let Love In.
I did.
Incredible. And it's something that's like really at the top of my mind as well, because all of these practices that we had initially that we're talking about,
yep.
I've done a really good job of implementing them from a business lens, from a networking lens. Like
yep.
I've been able to climb that ladder of that mastery that we were talking about through a business lens. But what I wish I could have done was look at this more holistically, because if you just go in silos, you leave yourself empty in other areas of your life that are massive priorities. Mm-hmm. So while I achieved quote unquote success in that lens, it left me absolutely emotionally empty and unavailable for everyone else in my life, relationships, love, and most importantly, love for myself.
Sure.
From what I've deduced, love is simply the absence of fear. Mm-hmm. Help us understand, one, kind of what you wrote the book about, and then let's go into the concept of love, and then we'll go from there.
Yeah. So I wrote the book from the lens of my story and detailing, how I grew up, the abuse that I experienced, and how that blocked me from being love, receiving love, and feeling safe to give love in return. Because most men, when we experience pain, a lot of which happens in our early childhood, what do? We create armor out of it, which however unconsciously or unintentionally, we then use to block love because we have a wounded or an unhealthy association with it, which is true for a lot of people. If you were raised in an abusive household, whether it was verbal, whether it was physical, or maybe it was just a chaotic environment. Maybe there was no abuse, but what you knew was a high degree of emotional dysregulation and chaos, right? When you, for example, disobeyed, your parents became overly emotional. And so your nervous system then wired in a way to self-protect so that you could balance these really incredible big emotions. Well, that's going to, of course, then bleed into your romantic relationships later on in life in a way where you're still, at least from a nervous system perspective, you're still operating in a protective stance. So what is that going to look like, tangibly speaking? It's going to look like a struggle with being vulnerable, a struggle with navigating conflict in a calm and collected manner, amongst various other things, intimacy, whether it be physical or whether it be emotional, relational, conversational. And so I talked about like what I went through to break through all of that, heal all of that, overcome it, so I could do what? So I could let love in. I could have titled the book Let Abundance In or Let Opportunity In. I just felt like Let Love In was best because, of course, all of those things are inhibited. Our ability to receive them, to be receptive to them, to nurture and grow our capacity for a greater degree of those things until we invest in our self-growth and our healing, which of course, and as we communicated earlier around fitness, it's one thing to be healed. It's a whole other thing entirely to be fit. Two very, very different worlds. One is a high level of fluency and self-mastery. And so that's what I wrote the book about, to kind of serve as a roadmap for growth for others, to say, here's what I did. Here's what worked for me. You can go and do it too if you hope to experience more out of life, more love, more financial success, more abundance, more opportunity.
Yeah. Can I share a story with you that was super impactful from this work that that we've been talking about?
Yeah, please.
And I'm kind of getting emotional just thinking about it. I'm going through eyes closed with my counselor, and every time I do somatic work, we get to my heart and I can't go any deeper. There's so much fear there. And so I close my eyes and we're looking at it, and there's what I'm perceiving is a vault. There's a vault there, and there's a guard. Think of like a Roman centurion guarding the vault. And he has me take Jesus with me for the first time, where I take Jesus with me to the vault. And we ask the guard to step aside, and we open the vault, and there's nothing there. And what I realized was, like, the entire time I've had something guarding my heart, like inhibiting me to let love in, because I was fearful of something. And it was all a lie. There was nothing that it was guarding the entire time. And so instead, and the reason why I think it was inhibiting me for so long was because I kept bringing shame to that guard. Fuck you. Why are you there? You don't need to be here anymore. Let me kill you. When I took the walk with Jesus to him, we just appreciated the guard. I said, thank you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for serving the purpose. That was a major breakthrough for me, because I felt like I've had to manufacture love for so long. And I'm not, by any means completely healed in that journey whatsoever. And I don't know if the goal is to be completely healed at all. I don't think there is a destination to it.
No.
But that was a massive breakthrough. It was just looking like, wow, this is a lie. And you're safe to, one, start loving yourself so that you can start receiving it and giving it. I just figured I'd share that with you, and then I'd love your take on it or anything from there. It just came to mind, and I'm just sharing this as a brother.
That's really beautiful. I appreciate you sharing that with me. That's what a powerful experience. Whenever we say yes to something, we simultaneously say no to something else. So whenever we say yes to self-protecting in the name of keeping us safe from rejection, from ridicule, from abandonment, from hurt, we say no to experiencing a greater degree of love, intimacy, and acceptance. I'd be interested to know, rather than a guard in front of your heart, what if it was your 5-year-old self?
I think that's what it was. I think that's what we deduced it to. I left that part out.
And how would that change your association and your relationship to the guard?
It just wanted love. There was something that 5-year-old self never got. And it's been crying for so long.
Yeah. And it hasn't felt safe to let others in. Have you ever taken the Enneagram?
Yeah, I'm a 4.
You're 4.
Yeah, everyone says I'm a 3.
High in 3. We're all the types.
Yeah.
It's just a question of...
I've taken it multiple times because I was like, you have to take it. You're not a 4. I was like,
Fours are the anomalies of the Enneagram, and I say that in the best way. But nevertheless, if you're a 4, you likely have a wing of 3. So you can have either a wing of 5 or a wing of 3.
Sure.
So what 3s do as a means to self-protect against feeling worthless is, and we all do this to a degree, but 3s are especially known for this, is they build an image or a facade of who they think they need to be, and they get people to fall in love with that, as opposed to who they really are beneath that. Who are you beyond the business, beyond the money, beyond the success, beyond the ambition, that you have for your future and for the impact that you desire to have, right? Because when you understand who you really are, right, that's when we can begin.
Yeah.
Whether it's in a coaching or therapy relationship, or even in a romantic relationship, right? That's kind of when the relationship really starts, is when you really let someone in a way that says, okay, I've allowed you to see the facade that I put up, however unconsciously or unintentionally. Here's who I really am behind that which I project.
Certainly got a wing of 3 in me.
It's just a means to self-protect.
Yeah.
And so why I say that is because when, of course, you come into awareness of that, it allows you to have a significantly deeper appreciation for what has gone into creating the whole of who you are, right? The architecture, right? The map of your soul, and what you are prone to, right? The behavior patterns, the habits that you are prone to in order to continue to reinforce your core fear, right? We all have a core fear. We all have a core motivation. That's not the question. The question is simply, how much mastery have we gained over our ego? Because our ego wants to keep us, it wants to do everything that it can to keep us in alignment with our core fear as much as possible. And so our work, right, is on doing the internal work, right? Or as Rumi once put it, your goal isn't to seek after love. It is to seek after and find all of the barriers within you that stand against it.
Because the love is there.
Right. Love is already there.
Yeah. Oh, man. I love this stuff. And then the perfect example of the progress of everything that we had just talked about, that you can actually heal through it, uncover it all, is this podcast itself. Like me being open to having these conversations, that facade was way up early on.
Yeah.
Right. And I wouldn't even be open to having these types of conversations, be like, oh, that's boring. That's gay. This isn't stuff men want to talk about.
Sure.
I think the only way you can really drop into to really fully understand this, because all this stuff never resonated with me until I started doing the work itself.
Right. Yep.
Because this work is not something you can really mentally wrap your head around. You need to feel it.
Right.
And in the beginning, I would almost argue in the first 6 to 12 months of it, you're probably you're going to feel it less than more. You just got to trust the fact that the work is going to work.
Yeah. And that's really the interesting thing, because, going back to how long does it take?
Yep.
Because, and I'm always very careful when clients ask me how long this is going to take, because I don't want to come across as being self-interested.
Sure. Yeah.
I mean, we could work together for 5 years.
Yeah. You can pay me for as long as you like.
Right.
Yeah.
But, as we grow, our capacity to face what has happened to us also grows. And so a very good example of this is and I talk about this in my book, I think the first time that I was able to bring myself to acknowledge that I was sexually abused was when I was 26. And it was the classic case of let's put the jack back in the box kind of thing. Yep. And went on the journey of self-growth. And it wasn't until I was in my mid-30s, so almost a decade later, that I was in a position with a therapist who specializes in what's referred to as AEDP. It's called Advanced Experiential Dynamic Psychotherapy, where the therapist is clinically certified to merge with you as the client and mirror back to you their emotional response to what you're communicating to them. It's insane, absolutely insane. A normal therapist is supposed to be completely neutral, and they're
sounds like it's a graduate level work.
Yeah, and their licensure is dependent upon them being neutral and their ability to be neutral. But anyway, he and I are talking about my abuse, and I will be 100% honest. I was we're talking about this again? I've been doing this work for 10 years, man. I've talked about this so many times, but my capacity had never been higher because of all the work that I had done. It took me 10 years to get to that point. And all of a sudden we're talking about the humiliation that I experienced that stemmed from being abused in front of friends and no one intervening to stop it. I had touched on that before, but I had never really gone into the depths of how that affected me after the fact, and how I never fully felt safe around my friends, and how I didn't feel like I could trust them to have my back or stand up for me, and how that created this deep felt sense of loneliness where I could be surrounded by people, but I would feel like I was on my own and never feeling like I had really close, like kind of ride or die friends. And that was the first time that I had the capacity to be able to really go into that. And it was one of the most healing experiences I have ever had. And this was 10 plus years into my growth and healing journey. I'd probably spent at the time $400,000 on self-development. And so that's one of the big things that I hope people understand is the importance of making this a lifestyle. Just like if you want to achieve peak physical fitness, it has to become a lifestyle. There's no other way around it. You know, if you look at Chris Bumstead, Mr. Olympia, you know, how many times has he won it? Like 5-6 times?
It's crazy, dude. He's crushing it.
It's his life. He's become obsessed with it in a way that has led to a high degree of mastery. This work is exactly the same.
And I think it's so important to distinguish that point, and we can wrap up on that, is the fact that it might be really hard to commit to the fact that you can go 10 years without experiencing all of the benefits that you think just to then get to the breakthrough, right?
Yeah.
But look at the cost of not doing it. Yeah. That's the way that I start to rationalize in my mind, and that helps me really exercise the faith muscle, because you have to have a level of faith going into this, not knowing what's on the other side and not knowing how long it'll take, because there's a lot of unknown. But I can assure you, like the cost of not doing the work and rather staying numb or continuing to regress and decline and not feeling, not having relationships, all these types of things is so much worse than the pain it is to get to the breakthrough. That's at least some of the external motivation that keeps me going. And then you start to get wins. And then you start to feel and you start to heal. And then that builds a lot more confidence and allows you to make it a little bit easier to show up to this stuff.
Right. It has a massive, dramatic ripple effect in every area of your life. So, you know, once you move past the conscious incompetence stage and you start to experience wins from it, whether it be in your romantic relationship, whether it be in your business, whether it be just in your internal capacity to experience peace, because a lot of the guys that I work with are high performers, and so they're incredibly anxious, and they don't know what to do about it. That is when a massive amount of adherence starts to occur, because then you start to look forward to doing the work.
Yeah. Dude, so good. So good. Well, I don't know how to express the level of gratitude I have for you. I mean, how amazing God is that I meet you on a virtual podcast and everything that we were talking about. I highly recommend listening to that podcast. It's got a lot of, because we didn't go deep into your story today, because I wanted to make sure that we were just wherever the flow was going. I didn't have any agenda to get into like me dropping in as a subject of the therapy as well.
The last podcast would be a good intro for this.
Yeah, exactly. So let's make sure to link that too, Bobby. But the fact that we had met 3 years ago, which seems like a lifetime ago, because I mean, some of my best friends are like I've known for 4 months at this point.
I love that though.
And then took that to continue to like actually make an intention to meet up in person, go to Atlanta together, constantly build this relationship. Then we started to refer business to each other. Yeah. Now we host events together. Just God is so good. I'm so blessed to have someone like you in my life, man, that would take time out of their busy life to come down to Tampa, Florida, where the golf's probably better in Georgia right now because of how hot it is here and how rainy it is. It's just inexplicable words that I can lean on someone that's as qualified to talk about this stuff as you are, as a friend, as a peer, as a mentor, as a business partner, just a brother, man. So
I appreciate that. I feel the same. I love you, man.
I love you too, brother. Appreciate you coming on. Any last words that you want to make sure that I know we unpacked a lot. If we had to summarize one little point that somebody had to fast forward to the end of this thing, really conceptualize, what is that for you?
I think you said it so well earlier, which is, you can't fuck it up. Play the game, And eventually there will be a day where the game is no longer fulfilling. And it will be a hard day, I promise. But it will be the doorway to the road less traveled.
Mic drop. Love you, bro.
Love you too, man.
Appreciate you.
This has been great.